Picture a dimly lit room in the late 19th century. An aging topographical engineer sits alone, the firelight reflecting off his heavy brass compass and transit level. He isn't organizing his field notes for the government. Instead, he's systematically feeding his entire life's work directly into the flame. He wasn't going mad, he was terrified. He had just mapped the supposedly untouched American West, only to discover ancient geometric grid lines and fully formed buried cities. He realized he wasn't charting a new world, but cataloging the ruins of a forgotten one, and he needed to keep those coordinates away from the emerging industrial elite. To understand why a man would destroy his undeniable geographical evidence, we have to look at the massive global empire his superiors were trying to erase forever. The name Tartaria often gets dismissed today as just another fringe internet rumor, but for centuries, the giant territories of Tartaria, or Grand Tartary, was a firmly established cartographic reality. This wasn't some mythical land like Atlantis. It was a sprawling, highly advanced civilization dominating the Eurasian steppe, stretching across Siberia, over the Bering Strait, and deep into the Americas. The official timeline of our history wants you to believe that between 1850 and 1890, pioneers built our modern world entirely from scratch. Yet, during this exact window, anomalous, magnificent architecture and fully realized infrastructure were mysteriously appearing almost overnight in supposedly remote, untouched regions. Our surveyor's mission was to map these newly acquired territories for the rapidly expanding empires of the 19th century. But as he pushed further into the so-called frontier zones, places like the Grand Canyon, Death Valley, and the Pacific Northwest, the geography completely contradicted the official narrative. He wasn't mapping untouched wilderness. He was documenting the sprawling remains of a vast, interconnected civilization that predated the pioneers by centuries. But if millions of square miles of advanced civilization were already sitting there waiting to be found, how did the history books convince us that pioneers in wooden wagons built our modern world? The official story is full of glaring red flags. Mainstream history dictates that the mapping of the American West and the Russian Far East was conducted by government-appointed pioneers and topographical engineers. Men like John Wesley Powell in the United States and agents of the Russian Imperial Geographical Society were celebrated as trailblazing heroes. We are told these brave explorers were braving hostile, untouched wilderness to draw the very first accurate maps of these vast, untamed regions. But when you look closely at the timeline of events, the official narrative begins to rapidly unravel. Take a look at the year 1884, when an international conference in Washington, D.C. officially established the Prime Meridian. We're taught this was simply a grand scientific advancement meant to standardize global time and mapping coordinates for a modernizing world. But what if it was actually a bureaucratic tool used to completely rewrite how borders were drawn? This conference effectively wiped old territorial boundaries off the face of the earth, centralizing cartographic authority into the hands of a few powerful, coordinated nations. Right after this, around 1889 and 1890, the government announced the official closing of the American frontier. This suspiciously aligns perfectly with our surveyor's mysterious death and the sudden, widespread destruction of local, regional land surveys. Why were regional maps suddenly centralized, standardized, and heavily redacted by the federal government during this exact narrow window of time? What were they in such a desperate rush to hide from the public record? The answer might lie in the archival architectural records from 1850 to 1880. When you look at the photographs and building plans from this era, you realize the absolute logistical nightmare of the official pioneer story. We are supposed to believe that men traveling in horse-drawn buggies, pulling wooden wagons over muddy, unpaved terrain, somehow managed to quarry, transport, and perfectly assemble massive neoclassical buildings. How do you explain the intricately carved granite and marble structures suddenly towering over muddy streets in places like San Francisco, Siberia, or Melbourne? The evidence heavily implies these pioneers did not build these magnificent structures. They merely found them, excavated them, and claimed them as their own. But the ultimate red flag of this era is the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Mainstream history claims this sprawling, highly advanced neoclassical city was built as a temporary exhibit out of plaster and hemp in absolute record time. And then, incredibly conveniently, it was suspiciously destroyed by fire shortly after the fair concluded, leaving no trace behind. Does that truly make any logical sense to you? Consider the sheer engineering impossibility of erecting such a massive electrified metropolis with 19th century tools in just a matter of months. Even with today's advanced machinery, a project of that scale would take decades. The timeline doesn't just bend, it breaks completely when you look at the physical evidence left behind. And the proof isn't just in the buildings, it's hidden in plain sight on the oldest maps in the world. To find the truth, we have to look past the heavily edited history books and examine the actual surviving documents from the 16th and 17th centuries. We aren't talking about mythical fantasy drawings. We are looking at the most accurate, relied upon navigational tools of their time, crafted by master cartographers like Gerardus Mercator. Mercator is the very man who invented the map projection system we still use on our GPS and modern maps today. He was a pioneer of exact geographical science. And when you look at Mercator's atlases or the breathtaking 1587 map created by Urbano Monte, they explicitly label massive dominant landmasses in northern Asia and the Americas. They don't label these regions as empty, unexplored frontiers. They clearly title them Tartaria or Grand Tartary. If you zoom in on the 1587 Urbano Monte map, you'll see details that completely shatter the official pioneer narrative. It depicts hundreds of large, highly developed cities, sprawling infrastructure, and prominent, geometrically perfect star forts. These massive settlements are located in the exact same regions that official 19th century surveyors later claimed were nothing but untouched wilderness, populated only by isolated nomadic tribes. How could Renaissance mapmakers chart hundreds of cities in a territory that supposedly wouldn't be settled by modern man for another 300 years? The answer becomes terrifyingly clear when we look at Document 1 and compare the Old World maps side by side with the altered topographical maps of 1884. On the left side of your screen, you see the rich, densely populated 17th century maps of these Tartarian regions, brimming with named cities, trading routes, and distinct borders. On the right side, you see the late 19th century maps of those exact same geographical coordinates, but the cities are gone. Instead, you are looking at massive blank white spaces labeled simply as unexplored or territories. This is exactly what our last surveyor was ordered to create, a literal, documented whitewashing of human history. He was instructed to draw blank spaces over the ruins of an empire, erasing their existence stroke by stroke to ensure no future generation would ever go looking for them. But while it is easy to burn a map or redraw a border, you cannot easily hide millions of tons of solid stone. And that brings us to the physical modern-day evidence. Take a close look at Photo 1. These are not isolated anomalies. These are photographs of 19th century government buildings and massive homes in major cities across the globe. Whether you look at the historic districts of Seattle, the downtown streets of Chicago, or the grand avenues of St. Petersburg, Russia, the same bizarre architectural feature appears again and again. Look at the ground level. You will see full-sized architectural windows, intricate stone archways, and even large, heavy doorways descending directly into the modern concrete sidewalks. Mainstream historians will tell you these were simply quirks of Victorian design, coal chutes, or clever ways to get natural light into a basement. But I want you to really think about that. Why would any master architect, utilizing expensive, intricate masonry, design a building with beautiful, ornate windows looking directly into a solid wall of dirt? Why would you construct a grand 10-foot archway as an entrance if the bottom half of it is permanently buried underground? Think about the famous Seattle Underground, or the historical event where the entire city of Chicago was supposedly jacked up on hydraulic screws to install a sewer system. We are told these massive city-wide terraforming projects were undertaken by men using 19th century tools in record time. But what if those official stories are elaborate cover-ups? What if they weren't raising the cities up, but rather digging the existing buried cities out of a massive layer of compacted sediment? The logical conclusion is that these structures were originally built on a ground level that was 10 to 15 feet lower than it is today. This physical evidence perfectly supports the surveyor's hidden truth. The pioneers of the 1800s didn't build these cities from scratch. They were walking on top of a recently buried civilization, digging out the top floors of these magnificent structures and claiming them as their own recent constructions. When you combine the erased cities on the 1884 maps with the half-buried architecture sitting in our downtowns right now, the surveyor's actions make perfect sense. These half-buried buildings are the smoking gun. They prove that something catastrophic happened right before our modern historical records begin. A worldwide event that buried the lower levels of a massive empire in several feet of earth, an event known to alternative researchers as the Mud Flood. So, what exactly is the Mud Flood? To understand the magnitude of what the Last Surveyor was trying to hide, we have to look at the massive cataclysm that wiped this advanced civilization off the map. Between the years of 1850 and 1920, alternative historians suggest a catastrophic event swept across the globe. Some researchers believe it was a natural disaster of biblical proportions, perhaps a massive liquefaction of the Earth's surface. Others suggest something far more sinister, a weaponized terraforming event or a deliberate engineered societal reset. Whatever the cause, the result was undeniable. This event rapidly buried the lower 10 to 15 feet of Tartarian buildings worldwide under a thick uniform layer of mud and sediment. It perfectly explains why we find magnificent, ornate archways and full-sized doors leading to absolutely nowhere, trapped beneath our modern concrete sidewalks. But if a massive civilization was suddenly buried, what happened to the millions of people who lived there, who inherited these newly emptied, grand cities that the pioneers supposedly built? This is where the timeline intersects with one of the most bizarre and tragic phenomena of the 19th century, the orphan train movement. The official history tells us that between 1854 and 1929, hundreds of thousands of orphaned or abandoned children were rounded up in eastern cities and shipped out west on trains to find a better life with frontier families. But frame this mass migration through the lens of a newly discovered inherited empire. What if these massive populations of displaced children were not merely seeking a better life, but were being used as a compliant workforce? Some researchers theorize these children were the repopulation force. They were sent by the thousands to inherit, clean out and provide cheap, untraceable labor to excavate the mud from the surviving Tartarian outposts. And what they were digging out was not just brick and mortar. They were uncovering the advanced, suppressed technology of a lost global empire. According to the lore surrounding his final days, this is what the surveyor documented in his burned field notes. He didn't just find empty buildings. He found the remnants of what researchers call antiquitech. Look closely at the classical architecture, we are told, was built by men in horse-drawn buggies. We see magnificent, perfectly proportioned domes, soaring spires, and copper-topped obelisks dominating the skylines. Modern architects claim these features are merely decorative, grand displays of civic pride. But what if they served a highly functional, vital purpose? Proponents of the Tartaria theory propose that these intricate, metal-clad structures were originally designed as atmospheric energy harvesters. They were massive geometric antennas built to pull decentralized, free electromagnetic energy directly from the ether. The old world didn't need coal or massive webs of tangled power lines. They utilized the natural frequencies of the earth, using the very architecture of their cities to power their civilization. And the evidence of this advanced understanding of energy and frequency isn't just found on the roofs of buildings. It is stamped directly into the earth itself. Look at photo 2. These are stunning, high-resolution aerial and satellite drone photographs of massive unexplainable forts located across the entire globe. You can find these structures everywhere, from Fort Botange in the Netherlands to Fort Jefferson off the coast of Florida, and even scattered across the shores of Japan and India. They are massive, perfectly symmetrical, multi-pointed bastions built on the exact principles of sacred geometry. If you view them from above, their precise shapes perfectly match cymatic frequencies, the visual patterns created by sound waves interacting with matter. Mainstream historians emphatically claim these were simply forts built for cannon defense during the 17th and 18th centuries. The angles, they say, were designed to eliminate blind spots for incoming artillery fire. But apply basic logic to these structures. Look at their completely illogical defensive positions. Many of these massive, intricate star forts are surrounded entirely by water, isolated from any strategic resources, and far too complex for mere artillery walls. Why would an army spend decades building a geometrically perfect, massive stone snowflake in the middle of a swamp just to mount a few iron cannons on the walls. The alternative theory suggests a completely different purpose. What if these star forts were never military installations at all? What if they were massive energy nodes, water treatment facilities, or frequency resonators that stabilized the Tartarian free energy grid? And the infrastructure of this lost empire wasn't just built upward and outward. It went deep underground. The surveyor's notes allegedly detail vast subterranean pneumatic tunnel systems stretching beneath major cities long before the official invention of the subway. Think about the first public transit systems in London or New York. The official story claims these massive, perfectly arched, brick-lined tunnels were dug by hand by immigrant laborers using pickaxes and shovels in just a few short years. But what if 19th century industrialists merely discovered these ancient, pre-existing subterranean highways? They simply cleared out the mud, laid down some steel tracks, threw in some steam engines, and conveniently rebranded them as modern public subway systems. The surveyor mapped an empire that harnessed the air, mastered sacred geometry, and traveled through vast underground networks. He knew that if he handed those coordinates over, the technology wouldn't be shared with the public. It would be monopolized. The evidence of this free energy empire is literally buried under our feet. But if the ruins are everywhere, why don't we see them? Because for the last 100 years, there has been a coordinated and effort to systematically destroy or hide what remains. Today, we don't just have to rely on old maps and theories. Modern technology is accidentally validating exactly what the Last Surveyor tried to warn us about. When construction crews use ground-penetrating radar for new developments, they aren't just finding bedrock. They are frequently scanning fully intact, buried anomalies. Modern urban excavations in major cities routinely uncover ornate architectural facades, complete with unbroken windows and paved streets, sitting 15 to 20 feet beneath the current ground level. Imagine looking at a digital scan and seeing an entire subterranean city block. Excavators are finding complete massive door frames with the heavy iron hinges still attached, buried completely in solid, compacted earth. Why would pioneers pave a road and build an elaborate storefront directly underneath the dirt? Evidence suggests they didn't. They were walking directly on top of a recently buried civilization. But when these undeniable anomalies are dug up, where does the physical evidence go? Enter the realm of massive institutional suppression. For over a century, powerful organizations like the Smithsonian Institution have been accused of acting as the ultimate gatekeepers of our historical timeline, actively hoarding out-of-place artifacts. Historical newspaper archives from the late 1800s and early 1900s are absolutely filled with local reports. Small-town gazettes consistently reported farmers unearthing giant 8-foot skeletons and strange copper alloy machinery. The moment these astonishing discoveries hit the local press, Smithsonian agents were quickly dispatched on the very next train out west. Yet, once these anomalous finds were secured, they vanished into vast, inaccessible vaults, never to be seen by the public or independent researchers again. What if their true mandate was never to preserve human history, but to curate a very specific, heavily controlled narrative? And what the authorities couldn't hide in a dark vault, they systematically destroyed in plain sight under the guise of progress. Look closely at the mid-20th century phenomenon known as urban renewal. We are told this was a progressive city planning movement designed to modernize our aging infrastructure in the 1960s and 70s. But some researchers believe this was actually a deliberate, sanitized cover-up, the final aggressive stage of erasing the Tartarian architectural footprint from the public eye. Consider the tragic demolition of the original Penn Station in New York City in 1963. A breathtaking, colossal masterpiece of granite and travertine, reduced to rubble and literally dumped in a New Jersey swamp. Countless magnificent, unexplainable stone structures from the 19th century were abruptly condemned by city councils. They were systematically demolished and replaced by ugly, brutalist concrete blocks and flat parking lots. Why would you destroy buildings engineered to last for 1,000 years, only to replace them with cheap concrete that crumbles in 3 decades, perhaps because the elite couldn't explain what those buildings actually were. This brings us right back to our surveyor and the frantic destruction of his topographical maps in the dead of night. He knew that erasing a civilization wasn't just about knocking down old buildings. It was about hiding the natural, massive infrastructure that connected them together. By burning his field notes, he permanently erased the true locations of vanished inland seas, ancient global highways, and perfectly aligned energy grid lines. He ensured that no modern researcher could ever easily trace the true, original borders of this lost empire using official government documents. Institutions don't spend billions of dollars destroying magnificent architecture and hiding historical records just for the fun of it. They do it because whoever controls the past controls the future. And more importantly, they control the power. Who truly benefited from the Great Reset and the surveyor's suppressed knowledge? To find the answer, you only have to look at the elite financial class of the Gilded Age. These were the infamous robber barons in historical titans like J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Thomas Edison. It is no coincidence they were establishing their massive global monopolies during the exact same time frame. Our surveyor was out mapping the ruins. What if the ultimate motive for erasing Tartaria from the history books was simply about maintaining absolute financial control? If the Tartarian civilization truly possessed the technology to harness decentralized, free atmospheric energy, that knowledge posed an existential threat to the emerging capitalist system. Think about it from their perspective. You cannot put a physical meter on the ambient ether. If the very architecture of a city provides unlimited power to its citizens, there is no way for an energy cartel to profit from it. Evidence suggests this elite class systematically went about dismantling the remaining antiquitech. They stripped the highly conductive copper, brass, and mercury elements from the old world domes and towering spires, effectively neutralizing the ancient power grid. They then rapidly replaced this elegant wireless system with a highly profitable, heavily metered grid. By destroying the evidence of a free energy civilization, these power structures created an absolute global monopoly on coal, oil, and centralized electricity. They effectively forced humanity to string up millions of miles of ugly, dangerous copper wires, making us pay endlessly for the very power that used to be freely available in the atmosphere. The suppression wasn't just about hiding history, it was about securing trillions of dollars. This terrifying realization connects directly back to our surveyor's desperate, solitary act in the dead of night. He didn't burn his life's work out of spite, and he certainly hadn't lost his mind. He burned his detailed field notes to keep the exact coordinates of intact, untapped Tartarian outposts out of the hands of these ruthless industrialists. He knew exactly what men like Morgan and Rockefeller would do if they found them. He knew they would either weaponize the ancient technology or hoard it away forever to protect their bottom line. The Last Surveyor took his greatest secrets to the grave, choosing the fire over handing the keys of a lost empire to the architects of our modern, metered world. As the last embers of those burning maps faded into the 19th century night, so did the absolute truth of our human inheritance. The immense weight of what that surveyor destroyed in the fire is almost too massive to comprehend. We are left with undeniable clues. The 16th century maps proving a vast empire, the unexplainable perfect geometry of global star forts, and the half-buried windows proving a worldwide mud flood. The remnants of Grand Tartaria didn't just vanish into thin air. They are still standing right in front of you, cleverly disguised as the majestic government buildings and towering old cathedrals in your very own city. The Last Surveyor's final act was a desperate warning to future generations. He knew the map is not territory, and our history books were written by the victors who dug our current world directly out of the mud. I challenge you to walk through your own downtown and look closely at the oldest buildings. Look for those grand, ornate windows descending straight into the modern concrete sidewalk, and ask yourself what they are really hiding. If you want to keep digging into the mud flood and the hidden truth of our realm, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below with the anomalous architecture you've noticed in your hometown, and never stop questioning the official story.